Hello, friends, and welcome to another North Carolina Family Policy Council weekly update for this week, ending on June the 13th. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun. Okay, anyway, we got that out of the way. We've got a lot to talk to you about this week. Jerry, it's been a busy week down in the General Assembly, but before we get to that, John, Governor Stein's State Advisory Council on Cannabis. We talked about it briefly last week.
We did.
Let's talk more about it this week.
Well, there was an announcement that the governor has called together, appointed a number of individuals from across the state to the State Advisory Council to consider the legalization potentially of marijuana, but also restrictions and regulations on a variety of different kinds of drugs, most of which derive from the cannabis plant. We'll see. Their scheduled review and process is going to be like a year and a half. So we don't know what's going to happen with all of this. However, we did issue a statement to the governor and this advisory council. And I just want to read that so that you all know kind of what our position is, where we stand on this officially with NC Family. One of the primary roles of government is to safeguard citizens from harm. We agree with Governor Stein that the prevalence of psychoactive and hallucinogenic drugs across our state is extremely concerning. However, the solution to this crisis is not to legalize and regulate harmful products and substances, but to protect our children, families, and communities from them. Therefore, we encourage and urge the governor and the State Advisory Council to honestly and soberly weigh all the evidence and facts when considering what is in the best interest, the true best interest of the state of North Carolina and its people.
And that statement can be found in an article that will be at the very bottom of this video. If you're watching it right now on our website, or if you're on YouTube, there's a Carolina Journal article where John's statement on this State Advisory Council is mentioned. Yes,
Just
sir.
a brief note on that. I know we said this last week. The governor rightly, started out talking about we need to protect our children,
Yes,
look out for our
absolutely.
children. And I don't say that he's saying something different, but we want to add to that. We obviously also want to look out for the adults in North Carolina.
Yeah.
Because these problematic substances, it's not just about saying, oh, you have to be 21 or older. No, it's if you're 21 and older, we all may need to just prohibit some of these. So.
Well, and the governor, rightly so, and we said this last week, has referred to the state of the state with respect to these drugs and substances as the wild, wild west.
Yes.
There are a lot of these harmful drugs and substances that are available in convenience stores, gas stations, vape shops, all across North Carolina, and North Carolina desperately needs to do something about it. Our contention is if these substances are harmful, then we need to get rid of them, get them off the shelves, as opposed to seeking ways to regulate them, make them legal, and then attempt to restrict access to them, because in the reality that's just unlikely to happen.
And if you've listened to other videos of ours over the last several months, we've applauded the efforts of the General Assembly, specifically Carla Cunningham and others who have proposed and now bills that are moving through the process to get Delta 8, Delta 9, these cannabinoid products off of school grounds or even away from school grounds. So there's an effort there, but if they're bad for kids, they're bad for adults, and they're not setting families up for success here in the state of North Carolina. Foster and adoptive care, specifically House Bill 612. We've spent some time talking about this on the videos, other articles about this. Jerry, what is the status of that bill currently in the state General Assembly building?
Again, we had shared before, the focus of this bill is to improve the foster care system in North Carolina. What people found as they continued to look at the bill, and specifically adoption attorneys and Christian adoption services, others were raising concerns saying, yes, we do want to improve foster care, but if we're not careful, what we're going to do is make it so parents are not inclined to adopt, and actually the foster care burden would become even greater. And so this week, amendment was proposed and adopted in the Senate Judiciary Committee, which addressed that concern about the impact on adoption. So we were encouraged. This is part of the legislative process. It goes through different chambers, committees in both chambers, And here it is, it's passed the House, over in the Senate, and when it got to the Judiciary Committee, these changes were made this week.
Well, and there is broad support for this
Yes.
legislation, because I think we all recognize that there need to be improvements made to the foster care system. Great efforts by Representative Alan Chesser and a number of others to really push this bill forward. However, there were, as Jerry said, these significant concerns raised about a couple of provisions in the bill that could significantly impact adoption, make adoption more difficult in North Carolina. And fortunately, this amendment was adopted in the Senate Judiciary Committee to address those concerns. This bill still has a ways to go before it is enacted into law. And so we will be following it very, very closely and keep you informed about what happens with that. But we're grateful that the amendment was adopted to the bill and addressed the concerns that had been expressed.
So a great big thanks to Representative Chesser, Senator Jarvis, and all those that had a big part in making this bill heard. And thank you for addressing the concerns of many citizens across the state of North Carolina. Another bill that we're watching right now, paying close attention to, is HB 805. The Senate has added more provisions to this bill. This bill seeks to, the intent of this bill is to prevent the sexual exploitation. The bill title says of women and children, but certainly of men and boys and girls and women as well. So all people, we don't want the sexual exploitation or the exploitation for any matter of anyone. So some provisions have been added to this bill. What provisions have been added?
Well, Mitch, there were three provisions added to what was originally House Bill 805. The first of which, very important, which would officially recognize only two sexes in North Carolina law and administrative rules and regulations and public policies adopted by the state of North Carolina. In essence, what this does is define the terms male and female.
Yes.
Male means a term that, when used to refer to a natural person, means a person belonging at conception to the sex characterized by a reproductive system with the biological function of producing sperm. And likewise, female is very similar, the sex characterized by a reproductive system with the biological function of producing ova or eggs. So kind of getting down to basic biology, there are two sexes, male and female, and those sexes are manifest themselves in the reproductive system. Something that we know inherently is true, and this provision in this bill would recognize that in North Carolina law.
Chromosomes are also mentioned as a genetic marker distinguishing XXXY chromosomal differences between male and female. So a lot of things there to help us understand that God made men and God made women and God made them both.
Yeah. And I know in the discussion in the committee, the senator who was proposing this amendment to the bill, was pointing out the reality that not that many years ago, you would understand you don't need to make some of these distinctions in law. People understood them, but they were explaining that in today's world, these are important distinctions. So they were added to this bill, in committee this week.
Yep.
Another provision that we may want to cover is the prohibition of transgender surgeries, specifically for prisoners,
Yes.
inmates.
Yep.
And that state dollars, North Carolina tax dollars, will not be used to fund those gender transition surgeries. Easy for you to say, not me. And so that's another great provision added to this.
Yes, and it would clarify, in addition, that puberty-blocking drugs and cross-sex hormones also, state dollars cannot be used to fund those types of drugs or surgeries for individuals who are incarcerated within the state's prison system.
That's excellent news. Excellent news. So those are a couple of bills that we're looking at. Jerry, one final thing before we wrap up our video for this week. The speaker said something very interesting on Wednesday of this week and the last few moments of the House legislative session for the day. He talked about things transpiring over the next couple of weeks. What do we need to know about that?
All right. And again, I think we've mentioned before that the fiscal year for North Carolina ends in June. So there's always a target to come up with a state budget by that day.
Rarely happens.
Rarely happens.
History
But a goal.
would say otherwise.
But what tends to happen is the session will just push on past that. This year, and this is consistent with what the speaker did early in the session, he put out a calendar saying these are the days we anticipate we'll be here, have votes on the floor, and they pretty much followed that calendar.
Pretty firm and fast on it.
So what he has indicated at this week's session is there'll be 2 more weeks that they'll have voting sessions on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. They're actually adding a day because pretty much so far they've been Tuesday and Wednesday when they've had floor votes in the House. And the idea is that this session, in large part, will stop in June, and then possibly, he didn't mention this, but this is what we continue to hear, come back later to address business further. We don't know what will happen with the budget by the end of June, or with some of the bills like the ones we're discussing. Some of these are moving, but there are a number of others, which we mentioned to you, hundreds literally, that made it the crossover. We don't know if they may come back up for consideration when they come back after a June. Apparently, there's going to be a break in June. Yeah.
Well, the reality is we have a bicameral legislature with a House and a Senate, and there's also this other position out there called the governor in the executive branch. And legislation has to be approved by all parties in
Yes.
order to be enacted into law. And so, we will see how things come together. Interesting procedurally this year, we've seen, especially in the Senate, adding a lot of content to House bills and sending those provisions back to the House. And so when the House receives those bills, they have the option to agree or concur with that amended bill or to not concur, and then the bill would go to a conference committee. And then the chambers have to appoint conferees to meet and try to iron out differences in the bill. And once all that happens, if it happens, then the bill goes to the governor for his signature or veto. Of course, if the governor vetoes the bill, it's got to come back to the legislature for a vote. And so there is, a lot left to do on a lot of the substance, including the budget, but a lot of these other bills that we've been talking about, because very few measures have actually been ratified by the General Assembly, which means they passed both chambers and have been sent to the governor. So a lot still pending out there.
So for those of you out there worried about a June 30th fiscal deadline, don't worry. The state is not going to shut down. It will continue to operate. Yep. We will keep you updated on what happens inside the General Assembly building over the next couple of weeks as that fiscal deadline approaches. As always, you can go to our website at ncfamily.org, ncfamily.org, to learn about all of the things that we've told you about today and so many more things, including our action alert page, where you can take action on the things that matter to you and your family. So thank you once again for continuing to watch these videos and get updates about what's happening here in your home state. On behalf of Jerry and John, I'm Mitch and the rest of our team here at NC Family. Thank you for watching another one of our weekly update videos. God bless you all.